The Kremlin has confirmed the phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump that's due to take place this afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. Paris time. During that highly anticipated call, the leaders are due to talk about the war in Ukraine and the, quote, normalization of U.S.-Russian ties. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, however, says he is skeptical Putin will do little more than pay lip service to Trump.
Саме Путін вже тиждень не здатний.
For a week now, Putin has been unable to squeeze out a yes to the ceasefire proposal. He's saying whatever he wants, but not what the whole world wants to hear. The unconditional ceasefire proposal is essentially about saving lives, allowing diplomats to work on ensuring security and a lasting peace, a proposal that Russia is ignoring. Pressure is needed to finally make Moscow accept that their war must be brought to an end.
We're going to focus more on this Putin-Trump phone call now with Garret Martin in Washington. Garret, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today on France 24. Ukraine's already agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. Donald Trump going into this phone call expecting Putin to commit Russia as well. Do you think that's really going to happen?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, I think we've seen Vladimir Putin's reaction was somewhat measured. He mentions yes, but with the nuances, and those nuances are going to be very important. What are the conditions that are going to be attached, if any, to a Russian acceptance? And fundamentally, would those conditions then also be acceptable to Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainians?
So let's talk a bit about some of those conditions. I mean, of course, one big question is territory. Trump's hinted that one part of a longer-term peace plan could be territorial concessions by Ukraine. Zelensky, of course, consistently saying the sovereignty of Ukraine is not negotiable and that Russia should give back territory it seized. I mean, given that, how do you see things moving forward on that?
I think that's going to be a fundamental question. You're absolutely right. I mean, yes, for the moment, I think the Ukrainians have said that they would not accept any territorial concessions. In the scenario where meaningful security guarantees, which is really a core demand for the Ukrainians, I think they do not want a repeat of the Minsk Accords. If there was meaningful security guarantees attached to any territorial concessions, I think then it's possible that there would be a window for agreement. But some of the other Russian demands, such as demilitarization of Ukraine, no presence of Western peacekeeping troops, those, I think, could be a hard obstacle to any longer-term meaningful peace.
Well, let's get back to that idea of security guarantees for Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky has said several times Putin does not abide by agreements. I mean, what kind of leverage does Donald Trump and the U.S. have at this point to get Russia to toe the line?
Well, I think there's a couple. I mean, one is the fundamental question also when we're looking at paying attention to the United States is, does Donald Trump just want a cessation of fighting? Does he just want a ceasefire now? Or is he interested then in putting the work afterwards for a long-term peace? That's not entirely clear. So I think that's one element. Secondly, I do think that there is the economic weapon that the United States can wield. I mean, I think the threat for more meaningful sanctions could be a form of leverage over Vladimir Putin. Would that be enough? I think that remains to be seen. But the United States has tools. The question is, are they willing to put the work and are they willing to use them?
The Kremlin's also said another key point of these talks is, quote, normalizing Russia's relations with the United States. Do you see the U.S. and Russia getting closer?
Well, certainly, I think the fact that essentially through the first phone call back in February, through what we're seeing now, through Steve Witkoff being in Moscow, there is the first step towards a form of normalization. Essentially, Moscow had been a pariah for the Western states since the full-scale invasion. So we have the first steps towards normalization. Now, will that lead to more cooperation over other domains? Again, I think that remains to be seen, and a lot will depend on what we'll see in the next few weeks and how these ceasefire talks happen. But certainly, at the very least, the United States has conveyed a desire to engage with Russia, which I think is already a bit of a victory for Vladimir Putin.
And it's certainly a significant shift in the current world order that's been in place since the start of the Cold War. What kind of consequences do you think that kind of rapprochement between the U.S. and Russia would have on the rest of the world, particularly here in Europe?
I think it could be very consequential. There is a permanent fear. We saw that even in the lead up to the war 3 years ago, and we've seen that now in the last few weeks. A constant fear of another Yalta, to go back to the conference in 1945, when there was a sense that issues that matter to Europeans were decided without the Europeans being present. I think that is a big issue. Yes, you have the US-Russian talk and the phone call we'll have today, but the Europeans have been trying to make sure that they are part and parcel of any meaningful sort of diplomatic agreement. So again, I think that will be a test in the next few weeks as to whether the European perspective is taken into consideration, whether in Moscow and in Washington.
Garret, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but Donald Trump has long positioned himself as a deal maker. He's talked a lot about his special relationship with Vladimir Putin. I mean, what do you think? Do you think he'll be able to make some sort of deal with Putin that will be good for Ukraine?
I am somewhat optimistic of the opportunities for a ceasefire being agreed, but I'm not less confident about addressing the root perceptions of the conflict. For the Ukrainians, at the heart, they are interested in maintaining their territorial integrity. It seems that from the Russian perspective, when they talk about the root cause of the conflict, they're talking about the fact that they would not accept that Ukraine can make sovereign choices about whether it wants to be closer to the West. That is a binary choice. There's not really room for negotiation on that fundamental question. So on that front, I'm less optimistic, and Donald Trump can really resolve this.
Garret, thank you for that. Garret Martin speaking to me live from Washington.
Thank you.